The Russell family are at the centre of the Gilded Age on HBO, and within season 3 we're seeing the family quite literally falling apart from many different perspectives. Whether it be George and him not having the finances for his railroad project, Bertha pushing her daughter and her husband away due to her selfish gain, and Gladys with her mental state being on the verge of breaking because she's being forced to marry the Duke of Buckingham, somebody that she doesn't love. Whilst The Gilded Age is a fictional TV series, a lot of the characters draw inspiration from real-life American socialites of the time, and I wanted to look at the Russells in particular and see what's going to happen to them based on the true events. So let's find out if Gladys will marry the Duke and if the family will remain intact at the end. Could Bertha and George get a divorce? Well, let's get into it. Here is The Gilded Age Season 3 versus the true story. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Will Gladys marry the Duke? The entire first half of the season feels like it's all about the build-up to us witnessing if Gladys is going to be marrying the Duke, even though it's the last thing in the world that she actually wants. When looking at the family that the Russells are based on, the Vanderbilts, there are clear parallels that we're seeing between Gladys and Consuelo, the individual that she's based on. Consuelo was said to be forced to marry the Duke of Marlborough, somebody that her mother, Alva Belmont, which would be Bertha Russell, was conducting. She was said to originally beg for her daughter to marry him before it turned into outright forcing. Consuelo had no interest in marrying the Duke, and she was actually secretly engaged to Winthrop Rutherford, an American socialite that was 15 years older than her. This already shows the similarities to Gladys, as Billy Colton would most likely be Winthrop Rutherford in this instance. Consuelo got to a point where she felt she could do nothing more, other than lock herself in her bedroom and refuse to come out, hoping that it would all just pass over, but that didn't end up happening. Her mother Alva was said to have gotten extremely ill due to the resistance that her daughter was putting up, and it was mentioned that she was apparently on the cusp of dying. This was what ultimately got Consuelo out of her room, and when she did get out of it, her mother made a miraculous recovery, obviously, showing that it was almost likely for show and to put fear into her daughter. Alva also tried to threaten Consuelo into the marriage by saying that if she didn't marry the Duke and if she chose to be loyal to her secret engagement, then she'd have Winthrop Rutherford murdered. So it quite literally put Consuelo into a position where all she could do was appease her mother. This is because her life would be a misery, and the person that she actually cared for would also end up being harmed due to her own actions, or lack of. Consuelo ultimately married the Duke of Marlborough in November of 1895, and it was said that as they were getting married and were stood at the altar, Consuelo had tears in her eyes underneath her veil. Something which showed just how much she didn't want to marry him, and that she was moved around like an item rather than a human being. This marriage didn't actually last forever though. A few years into the marriage, Consuelo reunited with her former lover, Winthrop Rutherford, and they spent a couple of weeks together in Paris. She even admitted this to the Duke and said how she wished to marry him instead. The Duke ultimately went away for 6 months to see his cousin Winston Churchill as he was serving in the Boer War in South Africa, and whilst he was away, Consuelo was intimate with other men. When the Duke returned, there was nothing left between them, and he ended up falling for another woman called Gladys, which I actually think is quite funny, seeing as though Gladys is the name of the character that Consuelo is based on in the show. And from there, in 1906, the couple separated and they got divorced in 1921, where the marriage was annulled, following Alva admitting that she forced her daughter into it. So the marriage that Alva forced her daughter into was one that was littered with adultery, affairs, a lack of love, and a relationship that wasn't all that pleasant. So it showed that if she had have originally let her daughter marry for love, then none of that would have happened. Consuelo did actually go on to marry somebody else after. It wasn't Rutherford, but it seemed like she did get a kind of happy ending. It was said that after the marriage to the Duke was over, in Alva's later years, Consuelo forgave her mother for forcing her to marry him and feeling as though she had complete power over her, and they had a much closer and easier relationship. Now, when looking at the show, it seems like everything up to the wedding has actually happened and the true events have been mirrored. We've had Bertha forcing Gladys into marrying the Duke, Gladys running away because she's in love with Billy Colton, the wedding being agreed and planned even though she doesn't want to go through with it. And it also seems like Gladys is going to be locked in her room in episode 4 because the maids are asking if she's going to come down from her room that day. This could be Gladys wanting to lock herself away, or it could well be Bertha locking her in there after they have an argument and her knowing that Gladys is a bit like a loose cannon and she won't want her running away again as it would be an embarrassment for the family. So I think we're sadly going to see Gladys marrying the Duke, and the sad marriage that Consuelo had will be what Gladys Russell experiences as well. But I think that marriage is going to be something that comes at a cost to the Russell family. Will Bertha and George get divorced? Bertha and George's relationship is one that I feel like we're slowly seeing deteriorate due to Bertha's actions. George doesn't understand why it is that she's so set on getting Gladys to marry the Duke rather than allowing her to marry for love. So George is left in this conflicted state because he originally promised his daughter that she could marry for love, but now he's not standing by her. In the most recent episode, we saw completely opposite reactions from Bertha and George when it came to the announcements of Gladys's engagement to the Duke, and we also saw him turn down her advancement of being intimate with her, simply saying that he was tired, when in reality, it just looks like he's getting more and more frustrated by her desire to rise up the social ranks rather than allow her family to just be happy. So it's making me question if we could well see them separate. Will they? Well, we can look at the real-life people that they're based on to see how their story ended. Alva Belmont, who we know as Bertha Russell, and William K. Vanderbilt I, who is represented by George Russell in the show, did actually end up getting separated after 20 years of marriage. They got married in 1875, and they were then divorced in 1895. Within their story, it was said that they got divorced due to William's apparent adultery, saying that Alva became aware of him cheating. However, there are others out there who say that William hired a woman to pretend to be his mistress so that Alva would file for divorce and ultimately divorce him due to the marriage that they had being loveless. It was late in that year that Alva also forced Consuelo to marry the Duke of Marlborough as well, so it was a rough time for Alva at that time. However, both of them actually went on to marry different people following their divorce. Alva remarried the following year in 1896 and William remarried a few years later in 1903. Whilst the timeline of events would be slightly different if we were to see a divorce being mirrored in the show, I think this is something that the show is actually most definitely building towards from a plot perspective. I don't think we'll see George having an affair because that type of behaviour isn't really ingrained within him, and I couldn't see that just being thrown in there. But instead, I think their separation could come from the blinded greed and vanity that Bertha is searching for, and I feel George will find it an unattractive quality. George has his businesses that he clearly cares about and is investing a lot of time in, and as of right now, it's getting more focused than what his marriage is. When we see them together, he just seems to be growing increasingly frustrated with Bertha, and I can't see that changing. He's seeing a side to her that we're all seeing. She's an ice queen, and she's not going to stop until she gets what she wants, but sadly, I think that's going to be the very thing that ends up causing her family to ultimately break down. There's been talk of a divorce through Aurora and Charles and how damaging it can be to a woman of high society, and I think we could be seeing that through them so that if Bertha has to go through that, we'd see how it would quite literally ruin her life. As I said at the start, whilst the Gilded Age is purely written in a fictitious way, there are definitely comparisons and parallels that can be drawn from the true story. I think Gladys will marry the Duke and she'll have an unhappy time, as that's what Consuelo went through, and I also think that George and Bertha are going to end up breaking up and we'll see them go through a divorce which could ruin the Russells' name in high society. But until we see it happen, we'll just have to wait and see. So, there you have it, the Gilded Age Season 3 versus the true story. If you want to see a full breakdown on the Gilded Age Season 3, then check the playlist below. I'm covering every episode, so don't forget to subscribe. Do you think George and Bertha will get divorced? Share your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for tuning into the video and I'll see you in the next one.